Gemara Sima Tova. It's amazing to be starting the new year with you, my early sisters and brothers. 5785. May it come on us and all the world for good. We say Amen. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Saturday night, the first one of the year? Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, I'm guessing, Lucy in Minnesota, Lorraine in Texas, Melissa in Great Neck. Excuse me, Ella's with us, Chaim in Florida, Michelle in Washington State. Welcome, everybody. We have a remarkably short daf. So let's get into it. We're working our way through Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. We are now in chapter 7, tonight opening and completing, God willing, Mishnah number 3, leaving Mishnah number 4 for tomorrow. Now, tomorrow is a fast day. It's the Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia. Very interesting, colorful story. I won't do right now, but you can easily Google it. It's an interesting story about a murder plot in ancient Israel that ended up becoming a fast day right after Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah actually was Thursday and Friday, but because we had Shabbos today, we don't do a fast on Shabbos. So Tzom Gedalia will be tomorrow. Not always so easy to do our class on a fast day, but we're missing enough days with the holidays. We're going to have 2 more 3-day Chags, 2 more 3-day holidays in the first days and last days of Sukkot. And also, we're not going to have class a week from today, next Saturday night, as we're coming out of Yom Kippur. So I really want to minimize the number of days that we miss. So we will have class at the regular Sunday time tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific. It'll be toward the end of my fast here in LA, but we'll buckle down and do it. Okay, Mishnah number 3. We actually picked this up at the bottom of page 104b, and our daf tonight is page 105 here in Tractate Bava Basra. Mishnah 3. If the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you a plot of land of a certain size, measured precisely with a rope, more or less. Now, in the previous Mishnah, those were contradictory ideas. The question we had then was, if somebody says, I am selling you a field that is a base core, right? So that's a measurement of a field, the amount of land necessary to plant a core of seeds, or to plant a core of seeds. So this is a base core. And then we asked, well, it didn't say that. It said, I am selling you a base core measured with a rope. Measured with a rope means precisely measured, like with a surveyor. Or if he says, I'm selling you a base core more or less. So if it's precise, you need to give precisely that amount of land. If they say more or less, okay, then we see there's a tolerance of up to 1/24th extra or 1/24th deficient is going to be considered the sale is final because it was described as a sale of a base core more or less. And then we asked, well, if he didn't say measured with a rope or more or less, he simply said, I'm selling you a base core. So then do we treat that the way we treat a sale of a land that's precisely measured? Or do we treat like the sale of a land which was stated to be more or less a base core? And we ended up, after the discussion, concluding that if he says only a base core, it's like he said a base core more or less. Now, here in Mishnah 3, he says both things. I'm selling you a base core measured with a rope, more or less. So that is 2 contradictory ideas, because he's saying I'm selling it to you precisely the size of a base core, and I'm selling you something that is more or less a base core. These 2 moderators, right, these 2 descriptors contradict each other. So then what do we do? That's what we're discussing now. So if the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you, sorry, very hot in here. If the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you a plot of land of a certain size, measured precisely with a rope, more or less, thereby attaching to the sale two contradictory stipulations. In this case, the words more or less nullify the words measured precisely with a rope. Accordingly, if the surplus did not exceed a quarter ka per sa, meaning 1/24th of the total, the sale is valid as is. And similarly, if the seller says to the buyer, I am selling you a plot of land of a certain size, more or less, measured precisely with a rope, so just changing the order of the contradictory stipulations, so then the words measured precisely with the rope nullify the words more or less, since the principle is that in all cases one should attend to the final expression. This is the statement of Ben Nanas, which is already a little bit problematic. So what does that mean? If we're going to listen to the words of the final expression, the one that comes last, sort of closest to the handshake deal, that's the one we listen to. What does that mean? So then are we going to say, since more or less was the last thing he said, it becomes a more or less deal? But if the last thing he said was measured precisely with a rope, then it becomes a precise deal? Or does it mean that we listen to the last thing said, meaning the last thing said, if it contradicts something that came earlier, so then we have a contradiction, and the contradiction means that both terms drop out, we're left with a more or less deal, but only because of what we learned in the previous Mishna, that if there's no stipulation, if it just says I'm selling you a base core, we treat that like a more or less deal. So what does it mean that the last stipulation is going to be the one that we attend to according to Ben Nanas? What does it mean that it contradicts what came before or supplants what come before, right? The contradiction cancels both of them, or the fact that it came last means that's the one we listen to. So let's keep reading. Now the Gemara, and we're on page 105a. Rabbi Abba Bar Memel says that Rav says Ben Nanas's colleagues disagree with him with regard to his ruling that one should attend to the final expression. The Gemara asks, what new law is Rav teaching us? Don't we already learn that they disagree from a Mishna in Tractate Bava Mitzia, page 102a, where there was once an incident in Sipori involving one who rented a bathhouse from another, and it was stated that the rental fee would be 12 gold dinars a year. And if you'd stop right there, okay, so you pay 12 gold dinars for a year's rental. But they added one more stipulation. 12 gold dinars a year, comma, 1 gold dinar per month. So if this was a, the rest, the calendar that the rest of the world uses, it would be the same thing. There's 12 months in a year. So if he says it's 12 gold dinars a year, 1 gold dinar per month, he's just repeating the same information. But in the Hebrew calendar, it's not the same information. Because in the Hebrew calendar, for 7 out of every 19 years, we have a leap year. And a leap year in the Hebrew calendar doesn't mean we add a day. It means we add a month, right? We have Adar 1 and Adar 2 in leap years, right? The month that we add an extra one of it, a second Adar, is the month with Purim, the most joyful month. So it's nice that when we have to add an extra month, it's the month of joy. Okay, so if the month got added, and in this case, where this issue came up and why they had a litigation, is because they added a month that year. So now that year had 13 months in it. So which is going to be the rental fee for that bathhouse? 12 gold dinars per year. He paid off a year, so now it's 12 gold dinars. Or, since he added that extra stipulation, 1 gold dinar per month, and there's an extra month, so then he should be getting 13 gold dinars in that year. So what happened? The incident came before Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And again, the reason we're saying this is because it was the last thing said. We're attending to the last expression. So are we going to say, well, he said 12 gold dinars a year, 1 gold dinar per month, and 1 gold dinar per month was the last thing said. So therefore, is the payment 13 gold dinars? Let's see. The incident came before Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and before Rabbi Yosef for a decision as to whether the intercalated month, the added month because it was a leap year, is included in the words 12 gold dinars a year, or whether an additional payment must be made for that month, as the agreement stipulated 1 gold dinar per month. Now, recall that in ancient times, the calendar had not been set already. Now, for almost 2,000 years, the calendar has been set. So we know how many, which years are going to be leap years. We can look into the calendar and predict that in the year 2028 or the year 2038 or the year 2058 or the year 3058, we're going to know if it's a leap year or a Jewish leap year or not. But back then, it wasn't like that, right? So first of all, when is Rosh Chodesh? When is a new month beginning? Depended on the testimony of witnesses who had seen the new moon and described it. And they came and testified before the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. And then the Sanhedrin determined, yes, this is a new month, or no, this is not a new month. And then the word went out. And I was just reading about this, and they actually used the signal fires. We talked about it in our class before, similar to that scene in Lord of the Rings where they light the fires on the mountaintops to signal, that a new month has begun, and then they spread the news from Jerusalem all the way out into the diaspora. Okay, so since you don't know whether a year is going to be a leap year or not, at the outset, that now you see why this is really an important issue if they didn't stipulate, right? Now, in a time like that, when they're not sure, it would be important to get clarity when you made the contract. But like everything else we've been discussing in this tractate, it's when the parties were ambiguous in the deal that they made, and they're asking a rabbinical court, a beis din, to step in and interpret the ambiguous terms and create fairness out of it. Okay, so this was the question. Are we going to say 12 gold dinars per year, or are we going to follow the last expression, 1 gold dinar per month, when a month was added? And they said, the landlord and the tenant should divide the added month between them, and so the tenant should pay only half a gold dinar for it. This indicates that these sages ruled that the meaning of an agreement containing two contradictory expressions is in doubt, and therefore the parties divide the disputed amount between them. So we're not listening to the last expression. We're saying that the last expression, because it contradicts the previous expression, creates a doubt. This indicates that the sages ruled that the meaning of an agreement containing two contradictory expressions is in doubt, and therefore the parties divide the disputed amount between them. And from here it follows that they disagree with the opinion of Ben Nanas, who said that in such a case one should attend to the final expression. So the Gemara replies, if the sage's opinion was derived only from there, I would not know that they disagree with the opinion of Ben Nanas in all cases, as I would say that it is only there that in this case that the sages say that the parties divided the disputed amount between them. Why? Because it is possible to say that the landlord retracted his first statement and set the rental fee at 1 gold dinar per month, but it is also possible to say that he is explaining his earlier statement. Is he saying, no, not 12 gold dinars per year, rather 1 gold dinar per month, and that's why I get an extra gold dinar if a month is added? Or is he saying 12 gold dinars per year, and in case you're mathematically challenged, that works out to 1 gold dinar per month? Which is he saying? We're not sure. Because we're not sure, that's why they're going to split the cost of that added month. But that doesn't mean that we can learn out from there that the sages disagree with Ben Nanas in all cases, that we don't follow the last expression when there's a list of stipulations made about a purchase and sale. Right, this is to say he did not mean to relate the added month. Rather, he was clarifying that payment was to be made not with a lump sum at the end of the year, but in monthly installments. Right, that's a different way to interpret it. What he was saying is, it's 12 gold dinars per year, and you're going to pay me 1 gold dinar per month. Now, that is a good way to interpret it. It makes sense, right? There's logic to that. Why did he add the term 1 gold dinar per month? Because he's saying you're going to pay me 1 gold dinar per month. You're not paying me one lump sum. Since there is uncertainty with regard to his intention, the parties divide the contested sum between them. But here in our Mishnah, where the seller certainly retracted his first statement, when he first said, I'm selling you precisely a base core, and then said more or less, it's like as if he said, I'm going to sell you precisely a base core. Wait, you know what? I can't be so precise. I'm selling you a base core more or less. So he retracted the first statement. So then one might say that the sages would not disagree with Ben Nanas. And that since that's what really was happening, he retracted the first statement, although he didn't say that explicitly. But the contradictory second statement effectively proves that he was retracting his first statement. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that in all cases, the sages do disagree with Ben Nanas, but the case of the bathhouse was different because it was about the uncertainty of when the payment was going to be made. That's why he added it, not to contradict his earlier statement. Now, similar to what was cited above in the name of Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, this is the statement of Ben Nanas, who says with regard to a case of contradictory expressions that one should attend to the final expression. But the sages say, follow the least inclusive expression. The least inclusive expression, meaning the one that is the least advantageous to the buyer, in keeping with the principle that in a case of uncertainty, the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. Right? So if we're going to say, well, the seller made the statement, a seller is always trying to protect his own interests. Now the buyer is trying to get more out of him. He's going to have to prove that if he's going to get more money out of the seller, he's going to have to prove beyond the shadow or beyond a reasonable doubt that the seller owes him something. And if he's not able to prove it, okay, so then he's not going to get. Why? Because the burden of proof rests on the plaintiff in any litigation. Now, if we're saying, well, the burden of proof is on the one who's trying to extract either money or property from the defendant, okay, well, if the buyer has already received the property or a refund or whatever, and then the seller says, wait a minute, I gave you something I shouldn't have given you, well, then he's the plaintiff, and he is going to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But at any rate, follow the least inclusive expression, meaning the one that is least advantageous to the buyer, because that's probably what the seller meant. Now, the Gemara asks, did Shmuel mean to say that this is the statement of Ben Nanas, but that he, Shmuel, does not agree with him? But don't Rav and Shmuel both say, if the seller said to the buyer, I am selling you a core of grain, which is an amount equivalent to 30 sa, and I'm selling it to you for the sum of 30 sela, he can renege on the entire sale, even while measuring out the last sa. Since the seller stipulated that he was selling him a core for 30 sela, until he has measured out the full core, he can renege on the transaction. But if the seller said to the buyer, I am selling you a core of grain for 30 sela, and then he added the seemingly unnecessary extra words, each sa for a sela, we know that a core which is 30 sa is selling for a sa per sela if it's a core for 30 sela. But since he added the words a sa per sela, what did he do? So now he introduced the idea that I'm selling you one sa at a time. So each time I measure out a sa to you, that sale is final. And so even if he's measured out 29 sa, he can say, I'm not going to sell you the final sa, but the 29 that he's already measured out, that deal is done. As opposed to if he said, I'm selling you a core for 30 sela, then until he's measured out a full core, he can renege on the deal because he has not measured out that full amount that they agreed to. That's the difference between a unit price, the subunits, and a unit price of the total. Okay. Where am I? So the seller said, he can renege on the entire sale even while measuring out the last sa. And since the seller stipulated that he was selling a full core of grain, as long as he has not yet measured out the full amount, he may still renege, as the sale is not complete. But if the seller said to the buyer, I'm selling you a core of grain for 30 sela, each sa for a sela, the buyer acquires each sa one by one as it is being measured out to him. And since the seller specified the price per sela, he has indicated that he is ready to sell each sela on its own. And this seems to indicate that Shmuel maintains, in a case of contradictory expressions, one should attend to the final expression. So rather, Shmuel's formulation, this is the statement of Ben Nanas, should be explained like this. This is the statement of Ben Nanas, and he, meaning Shmuel, agrees with him that one should attend to the final expression. And the Gemara asks, does Shmuel really agree with Ben Nanas? But doesn't Shmuel say concerning the ruling of the sages that the landlord and the tenant should divide the added month in the case of the bathhouse, that they should divide it between them? So it ends up being 12 and a half gold dinars for the rental of a 13 months because of the added month in that leap year. Doesn't Shmuel say we are dealing with a case where the landlord came to collect the rent in the middle of the month? Only in that case is the disputed rent divided between them. But in a case where he came to collect the rent at the beginning of the month, the entire sum goes to the landlord who is demanding payment, since he is in possession of the property. And if he came at the end of the month, the entire sum goes to the tenant who is refusing payment, since he is in possession of the money. Right? The one bears the burden of proof is the one trying to extract money or property. So this indicates that Shmuel maintains that in a case of contradictory expressions, one should not attend to the last expression. Rather, the case is viewed as one of uncertainty, and the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. Now we're on page 105b. So rather, it must be that Shmuel actually meant to say that this is the statement of Ben Nanas, but he, meaning Shmuel, does not agree with him that one should attend to the last expression. In fact, he's in agreement with the sages who maintain that two contradictory expressions create a case of uncertainty. And there, in the case of the rent for the added month, what is the reason for his ruling that the landlord came to collect the rent at the beginning of the month? The entire sum goes to the landlord, whereas if he came at the end of the month, the money goes to the tenant, because the party who was awarded the money was seen as already being in possession of it. And in a case of uncertainty, money is left in the hands of the party with possession until the claimant can overcome the burden of proof. Here too, in the case where the seller says that he is selling a core of grain for 30 sela, each sa per sela, each sa for a sela, the buyer was seen as already being in possession of each sa that was measured out to him, and therefore the seller cannot renege on the sale. It is for this reason that the buyer acquires the grain, and not because of the principle that in a case of contradictory expressions, one should attend to the last expression. On a similar topic, Rav Huna says that they say in the school of Rav, if the seller said to the buyer, I am selling you this item for an istera, 100 ma. Now, an istera is a silver coin equal to 96 copper ma. So he said an istera, which is worth 96 ma, but he said an istera, comma, 100 ma. So you can see there is a contradiction between the two terms. So here it is assumed that he meant 100 ma, which is the last expression. And if the seller reversed the order and said that he was selling the item for 100 ma, comma, an istera, well then it is assumed that he meant an istera. So this would be evidence that we follow the last expression per the ruling of Ben Nanas. So the Gemara asks, what new law is Rav teaching us? Is it that with regard to the statement comprised of contradictory expressions, one should attend only to the last statement? But didn't Rav already say this on a different occasion? As Rav says, had I been there as a judge when the ruling was issued with regard to the rental fee for the added month in the case of the bathhouse, I would have given the entire month's rent to the landlord, based on the final expression in the rental agreement, 1 gold dinar per month. So if there's an added month, he gets an extra gold dinar. It ends up being 13 for the year. The Gemara answers, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara answers, it was necessary to state both rulings of Rav, as the one cannot necessarily be inferred from the other. If this law with regard to the istera was stated and that law with regard to the added month was not stated, I would say that when the seller uttered the second expression, 100 ma, he retracted his first expression about an istera, as the two expressions contradict one another, and for that reason, Rav said that one should attend to the final expression. But here, in the case of the added month, perhaps you would say that when the landlord utters the second expression, 1 gold dinar per month, he is not contradicting and canceling the first expression, but rather explaining it and clarifying it. You're going to pay me 1 dinar per month, not a lump sum at the beginning or at the end of the year. Therefore, Rav comes and teaches us that in all cases, one should attend to the final expression. Where did that case of the guy who said an istera, 100 ma, which are different amounts, in light of the fact that the istera is equivalent to 96 ma, when a promissory note reads an istera, 100 ma, or 100 ma, an istera, the bearer of the note receives only an istera because he is in the weaker position, since the burden of proof rests on the claimant, and this is in accordance with the opinion of the sages whose ruling was accepted by Shmuel on page 105a, who say that the least inclusive expression is always to be followed. Meaning, we don't follow Ben Nanas. We don't pay attention only to the last expression. We look deeper into the facts of the case, and we generally assume that the seller meant to give as little as possible. If there's ambiguity, and if the buyer wants to get more than that, he's going to have to overcome the burden of proof. And like every other case that we've been talking about for weeks, the buyer and the seller, the renter and the landlord, should have been more clear in the terms. It was because they had an ambiguous contract that they ended up in litigation. So always be as clear as possible when you enter into any kind of an agreement. Joe, mixing those two expressions sort of sounds like you get what you get and you don't get upset. Very good. And Beth, maybe just table it until it's a conducive format. Table it until it's a conducive format. I'm not sure what that means. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that means. But I think maybe you're basically agreeing with me that when there's an uncertainty, it would have been better if the parties had certainty. But in the absence of being able to really understand what they intended, okay, so then either the plaintiff is going to overcome the burden of proof, or he's just not going to get what it is that he is claiming. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And for those observing the fast, Tzom Gedalia, may you have a meaningful and uplifting fast, and one that is not too difficult. All the best, good vach, and Happy New Year. And since we're in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, may you be inscribed and sealed for a good decree in the coming year. Gamar Chasima Tova. All the best.